Thank you, Pivot and Shantanu. Pleasure to be here. And I hope this conversation typically, takes a lot of understanding around the digital identity, decentralized identifier, verifiable credentials. But I would try my best in order to see how we can quickly cover it up in the given time and bring an aspect of how this decentralized identity is also going to be useful, not just for the humans, but also for AI agent. So let me start by sharing my screen and we can get started. All right. So I think for the purpose of this conversation, I would try and keep the digital identity conversation at a very, very high level. I hope some of you do have an understanding, but otherwise that's a topic which required large understanding in terms of how overall the DID and the verifiable credential ecosystem works. But we'll try to do in terms of balancing act of how can this concept be applied to AI agent and maintain their reputation. With that said, let's get started. So I wouldn't, I would appreciate in case if we can make this more interactive. I'm happy to take the questions as we go along in case if there are any questions, and also wanted to, try and see in case if I can get some shout outs during the conversation and we can make this even more interactive for the specific slides, right? So first of all, I think this is one of the slide that I have particularly picked up in order to open up a conversation, because when we looked in the historical trend, what it has taken to reach 1 million users by so many popular companies so far has been exceptionally high compared to what ChatGPT did in 2022. And I think this is where it catches many people's eye in terms of what has been the primary reason where ChatGPT was able to do in a very fraction amount of number of days, whereas the players like Netflix, Airbnb has taken a huge number of time in order to reach to that 1 million mark. Any guesses? Anybody would like to jump in case if Shantanu, the floor is open for people to speak in between?
Yeah, absolutely. People can speak in between if required. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to make it a little more interactive if anybody wanted to share their view. I mean, there are multiple reasons, obviously, but anything that comes on top of your mind. Anyone?
Those who want to comment, they can simply unmute themselves and they can start talking and answer. Or maybe if it is not possible, then let me know. I'll unmute them. You can just raise your hands.
All right, then maybe I think let's keep going, and I would appreciate if anybody wanted to post a comment or raise the hand. But my personal favorite outside of all the tech innovation, the kind of crazy things that the solution has been offering, my personal favorite is the PMF, right? The product market fit. While every one of us has been doing Google search for any need that we have on the internet, ChatGPT has created a huge difference in terms of the value proposition that they are bringing onto the table. And that is where I feel has been one of the reasons why they have been able to crack in 1 million users in 5 days, right? Because the value proposition is so strong. And I think I wanted to bring this slide, especially given that there are going to be builders, founders in this conversation. And I wanted to bring that there is a product market fit, one of the primary reasons which has driven this high number of users being gone into the AI space with ChatGPT. Moving on, I think AI has been becoming more powerful. There have been several numbers that have been thrown out, and those numbers are mind-boggling. But then we need to see how do we add a little bit control when we are talking about those AI systems. So all these numbers are across various reports, but the way I see TAM, SAM, SOM, I think those numbers are mind-boggling in terms of how big the scope looks like. And these are obvious because AI has been cutting across all the industry verticals. Also on the terminology side, I think there have been different terms that people have been using. Just wanted to bring everybody on the same page for our conversation for the rest of the session. I think we move from circle to circle where we are talking about Gen AI, which is one of the stream within the AI, and then we go to deep learning, which is more around the neural networks, and then machine learning, which is where we are talking about data and how those data are being used in order to create different models. And that all encompasses in terms of what we typically call as an artificial intelligence, which is simulating human intelligence, right? So just wanted to get the terms clarified. And on the similar line for the agent side of it, just wanted to paint a picture that there are typically three layers that we can imagine, which is compute layer at the bottom, where we are talking about the hardwares. We go into the layer up, which is the knowledge layer, data and models. And then comes the application layer, which is also connecting to our topic today, which is on the agent side. Now, within the agents, I think we can move across the spectrum where we are talking about more task-based agents or workflow agents or something like an assistant to co-pilot and then to the agent. Now, when it comes to agent, I think there are various different types of agents, and especially if we are talking about the agents which can operate in the centralized environment versus decentralized environment. So the ones that are primarily going into the decentralized environments are going to be totally decentralized autonomous agent versus the centralized autonomous agent. And the key difference is when we are talking about a decentralization, I think this is where the Web3 technology or the decentralized technology comes handy. And these agents can interact and take advantage of the payment rails or the decentralized infrastructure in order to interact, communicate, make transactions, and so on. So I think my intention of quickly going through some of those preliminary slides is to be on the same page, aligning in terms of definitions, aligning in terms of what we are going to be talking for the next set of 20, 30 minutes. And I would welcome the questions as in required in between. Now starting with the context in terms of what do we mean by agents and what are the key properties that we look forward to an AI agent. So again, not a rocket science. I'm sure there are thousands of different variants of definitions that comes to an agent. And I wanted to keep it to very, very basic and fundamental definition of an AI agent. So agents typically are goal-driven. These are software, right? These are goal-driven programs. They interact with the environments or tools, and there can be multiple tools that can potentially be there. And that's where the agents becomes different than the chatbots or the previous generation, where we have been able to automate, but then agent have the ability in order to go and interact with the environment, go and interact with different tools in order to create that kind of an end-to-end execution possible. They also have the decision-making capability, and they can take actions based upon the guardrails that have been provided. And that is typically making them more autonomous. I think this is an important slide from a perspective which is also relevant from our topic today on the agent identity side. When we are talking about agents, there are two ways where we can separate these interactions. One is human to agent, and second is agent to agent. Now, typically, human to agents are, I would say, kind of a phase one or a wave one, where we are seeing many agents are being part of the existing larger ecosystems or the organizations where they are simplifying the use cases which are related to customer service kind of things, right? And this is where a human is interacting with an agent in order to get certain services being done. This can also be the current environment where we are talking to assistant agent like ChatGPT and trying to get the information from them. That's more human talking to an agent. The wave two or phase two, which is, I would say, we are not too far, is where we are letting the agents talk to the other agents in order to make the ecosystem more autonomous. And this is where the execution can become more fast, the automation can go to a next level. And this would be a scenario where we would need to establish the trust between both the possible interactions, but typically when it comes to agent, the trust requirements are much more higher. So with that context in mind, for both the scenario, we are going to be talking about trust as an important bedrock for all the agent to agent and human to agent related communication. But then this is the problem statement. How do we establish this trust? And when we talk about a trust, even in the today's world, let's consider we are in the traditional world, the definition is still relevant. We are talking about when we talk about a trust, it needs to be based upon reputation. And this reputation comes with accountability. Similarly, accountability is based upon identities, and those identities should be verifiable. If we take a context, to give you an example, let's say if somebody is applying for a loan, that is where a bank would typically try to see what is the reputation score or what kind of CIBIL score or credit score this particular individual would have. And this kind of reputation is based upon the accountability, whether the user has X number of bank accounts, Y number of credit cards, whether the loans have been paid on time previously, and so on. That kind of an accountability is again associated to an identity. That is where either the various bank account or my national ID and those kind of identifiers are important in order to establish those accountability, and those identifiers needs to be verifiable. Same approach is applicable to AI agents. But then how do we go about creating those kind of an identifier for an agent is an important aspect. And that is where we are working towards giving this kind of a verifiable identities to an agent. And as I was explaining, these are important from both the perspective where we wanted to establish this trust when it comes to human to agent, and also when it is related to agent, that makes the entire process more autonomous. The question could come in, let's say if the agent is sitting within a particular closed ecosystem, whether it is Expedia.com or it's Airbnb.com, then typically the need for such kind of an agent interaction might not require an identity. However, when we talk typically for an open ecosystem, or we are talking about the marketplaces, or we are talking about any kind of a decentralized environment, that's where potentially we need to identify the identity for an agent in order to start interacting and ensure that all our transactions are trustworthy. I hope we are clear so far. If there is any question, happy to take it. But this was setting all the context of why we have been thinking in terms of creating those identifier and the reputation for agent. All right. I think then we actually start into the conversation where just before this call, I was taking a screenshot from ChatGPT, and I did literally ask, show me your ID. And this is the response that I got from ChatGPT 4.0. Because this kind of an, this type of tuning is required for an agent to, first of all, have that kind of an identifier, and then the agent fine tuning should be able to share those identifiers. What I notice is an obvious answer where ChatGPT do not have an identifier. And this is a scenario where when we interact with an agent, do we typically ask the agent an identity before we interact? And this is where we wanted to create this kind of a solution where we enable the agent with an identifier. There are certain key considerations before we jump into the approach that we have at Privado. I just wanted to share a little bit in terms of the considerations that we have thought through for this particular solution. So agent can lie, or maybe the kind of, the solution that has been provided by the agent, there could always be a suspicious thing that can come out. And that's where we can't trust the self-attestation. That's one of the first consideration, and that's where we need to have different ways of getting those attestations for the agents. The second one is attestations are made on this particular agent and not necessarily the other components like model. And this is where we believe in terms of a singularity approach. So one agent should have one identity. And this singularity where we are talking about this particular agent, we are not talking about any other agent, but we are talking about this particular agent who hold this identifier, right? I think that kind of a singularity is really important in order to build that trust. And this is where the need for a verifiable identifier, which is solely controlled by an agent, is important. And this is a longer conversation, but in a nutshell, what we are aiming is that agent should be in control of that private key. And that is where the agent should have a signing capability in order to sign a particular transaction and own that identifier. So these are some of the primary consideration from our perspective. When we enter into an agentic economy, these are going to be very important principle for the identity of an agent. I hope we are clear until this point. I wanted to jump in terms of showcasing how this solution would look like, right? So on my screen, on my previous screen, if you have seen, we were talking about, asking ChatGPT to show the ID. The ChatGPT certainly do not have an identifier and an identity, but then this may be applicable when we are talking about so many newer agents that are coming up. So imagine a situation where a user is interacting on a particular website, and then for this particular agent, they need to ask whether the agent hold an identity and can the agent show that particular identity. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm talking about an agent which is, let's say, a speech therapist. And if a user is asking to the speech therapist, show me the ID, the speech therapist should be able to give the identity. And this identity could potentially look something like this. Again, this is the early stage. The number of attributes, the number of attestation for this particular agent can grow as we go. But for a purpose of demonstration, what we are talking about, a simple verification interface, where this interface, when a user click on this verify button, this interface should be open and it would be able to provide those relevant information that might be applicable to this agent. So consider this scenario where this is a therapist bot, and this therapist bot is giving one identifier, which is a did identity did method that we have used in order to get this identifier. And there are a couple of very interesting attributes in here. The first one is where we are attributing it to a developer. Now, again, one of the key consideration is here that developer should not be in positions of the primary key, because there is always a possibility that the developer might eventually be giving these keys to another 100 of agents, right? And that's where we would lose the accountability. So the agent should hold that key, but at the same time, we need to map who is the developer or who is the owner of this agent. And that's where the first attribute that you see on the verification interface is where the agent identity is now being mapped to the developer identity. And the idea behind is that this gives us the ownership, this gives some association, and at the same time, if it's a reputation of the developer, can also represent that this bot is more genuine, and that's where the agent reputation can also be uplifted, right? So that's one of the attribute, but then the list can continue to grow further. There can be many more attributes or attestations that can go out for this agent. Imagine that there are third parties who are doing some kind of an audit, the way we do the smart contract audit. If there are agent audits that can happen, let's say for fairness, then there can be another attribute that can be added in here where the agent now have the fairness certificate. And similarly, there can be other set of audit certificates and different certificates that can be associated with this agent. Additionally, also think that if there are users who have been interacting with this agent and they wanted to share certain, I would say, feedback, those can also be positive or a negative attestation that can be associated to an agent. And if those attestations are written on chain, that's where the immutable record can keep a track of all the attestation given to this particular agent. I mean, from our perspective, we believe that agent will never have the consent requirement or a privacy requirement. That's where all those attestations and verifiable credentials can be visible on chain for this particular agent. And that eventually help in terms of creating that reputation that is verifiable on chain. So that covers in terms of, how do we, first of all, start with the fundamental thing in terms of giving one cryptographically verifiable identifier, we call this as the DID, to an agent. And once this DID has been assigned to an agent, we can do all those interesting things in terms of building up a reputation for an agent. So we can start with the developer, but then there can be an organization who can own this particular agent. There can be a legal firm who can attest it this agent for the legal side of it, and then the third parties as well as the users of this agent who can come together and provide those kind of attestation that can go for an agent identity. Imagine, I think once we are able to establish this, there would be very interesting overall agent reputation that can be built, and reputed agent can actually earn more premium versus the one that do not have the reputation. So giving an analogy, imagine that if we go on a Play Store or we go on an Apple Store and we wanted to download a particular application in today's world, typically the way we look at it is whether it got 4.3 rating out of 5, whether there are 1 million download, who is the owner of this particular application, and so on. Now, in the agent space, if there is a marketplace like this, and there are already quite a few, but as we go along, there are going to be more mature marketplaces. And on those marketplaces, before we interact or before we subscribe to an agent, we are going to be looking out for those kind of reputation parameters or attestation for this agent in terms of who is the builder of this agent, how many users have been using it, what other attestations are being provided, and that would eventually build that reputation for an agent, and that gives us also a trust and confidence in order to interact with this agent. Moving on, the second part of the diagram is where, on the right hand side, what you see is primarily where we have built in most part of the pieces, and this is where we got the entire trust ecosystem already established at Privado. This is where we are expecting that any developer, agents, or organization, they would be able to leverage the existing ecosystem from our toolkit, and this is where we would be able to provide the much needed trust ecosystem for the rest part of the user flow. But onto the agent side, there are components that needs to be created in order to establish that agent identity, and those attestations can be recorded on the trust registry. And this is where we are also building in terms of a unified trust registry, so that on-chain transactions that have been written across different chains, they can also be brought into one place, so that unified view of the agent reputation can be collected. All right, I think that was a little fast, little short, but I wanted to ensure that we are talking about how we see this particular space growing up, and especially when it comes to the wave of AI agents, how these AI agents are becoming very interesting, and they are opening up use cases across different dimensions, whether it is starting with the crypto trading or crypto recommendations to healthcare to e-commerce and so on. And I think for all those user interactions, there would be a need to identify an agent identity, and then agent identifier would eventually lead to the reputation of an agent. So I would take a pause at it and open up the floor for any questions.
Thanks, Ravi. I think this was brilliant. A lot of things that came to fore was primarily the fact that, an AI agent can also have an identity just like what a human being can have, and that can be verifiable in multiple different ways. The floor is open now for any questions. The audience is, you can ask any questions. You want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand. We can bring you on forward. You can open your video as well, and then we can look forward to having the question answered.
Can I ask?
Yeah, Rakesh, please go ahead. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Ravikant. This was a incredible thing. Like I didn't know like how time passed 30 minutes, to be honest. Especially the reputation thing, right? So I was just thinking like in terms of a use case or whatever, right? Yeah, there are already like agents which are launched under virtuals or Aliza platform or whatever. Let us take anything like AI XPT or whatever. Like who will issue and who will apply for a agent ID? Is it so? If you can just help me clarify that, and I as a user, right? Does it needs to be tagged on their individual profiles, or how it is exactly going to be helpful?
Good question. I think this is where many of this framework, and we are in touch with those frameworks, because majority of these frameworks are making it simple for the developer to go out and create your own agent. But I think for many of those use cases, the agent identity should be also spin up as the agent actually spin up, right? So coming back to your question, the way I was explaining on this particular slide, and I take your attention towards the right part. Once the agent is being created, the attribute of the developer needs to be associated to an agent. User not necessarily need to do much with the agent identity. It's the user who would go typically and ask this agent to show the ID. And then the user would be verifying whether this particular agent, which says, let's say, I'm a speech therapist, whether this speech therapist has been trained by a speech therapist specialist or not. So this is where, in our example, if you see, this is licensed therapist whose DID ID is also associated with this agent, giving confidence that this agent has been trained by some licensed therapist. At the same time, if there are ISO certificate, if there are any compliance guidelines, those can also be associated to an agent. That again adds up a lot of value when it comes to the agent reputation.
So
Does
you
that
just
answer
brought up related with the training of an agent, like has it like really trained upon particular set of models or whatever, right?
Yes.
Once again, like as it is evolving, there I think, as you have heard, T's are the ones where once again
Yeah.
agents can be trained inside the
Yeah.
T's so that it can be verified. Is it something which I can think of where once the T's are like once the agents run inside the T's, so verifiers after verifying inside the T's, will that get updated into the identity, something like that? Or
No, I think you're talking about two different aspects. First thing is you are talking in terms of verification of the agent identity, and then second you are talking about the transactions that are happening while interacting with the agent. If I got it right? So I believe.
transaction in the sense, like as you told, right? One
Hmm.
is the agent reputation, and think that the certification that the agent has been trained in this particular set of
Yes.
model.
Mm-hmm.
One way is earlier it was like kind of a T because it is secured and I can verify that
Yes.
okay, agent training has happened here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I think so. Within the T environment, I think if you're talking in terms of an execution, that's where the T power would come in, right? Where you're talking about the environment or the enclave where a user is interacting, providing it those feedback, but those feedbacks are not necessarily going outside of that environment or enclave. And then your private data can remain private when you are interacting with the agents, right? So in that context, yes, I think those agents where we are talking, especially the personal AI agents, that might be useful from a TE perspective.
right now, can we try it out? Like if I'm like bringing up an agent, can I what is it, register under the pivot ID or something like that, giving the
Yeah,
own
I
set
think
of attributes or
yes, certainly. I
for an
think
agent?
we have done a pilot, and there are a couple of other pilots that are ongoing. If you are aware about the Gaia hackathon that has happened in late last year, that's sometime in November. This is something that we presented during the Gaia hackathon. But if you wanted to explore it further, feel free to leverage our developer documentation. That's docs.privado.id. And you would be able to find out how you can leverage some of our component, including the JS SDK, in order to start giving DIT for an agent.
Thank you.
And you have my coordinate in case if you need further information.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah.
Ravi, can I ask a question?
Sure. Please go.
Yeah. Ravi, you were talking of centralized and decentralized environments for autonomous agents.
Yeah.
So let's say the ecosystem like BitTensor is a very decentralized ecosystem for mining and data and everything.
Mhm.
Whereas the recent Manus autonomous agent, it's very, very centralized in its approach. So how would these two ecosystems differ in terms of verifiable identity?
Yeah, I think if we talk about these stages of growth of the agents, right, we are not yet there where we are talking about a truly autonomous agent. And then within those autonomous agent, the way we evangelize is that there would be centralized autonomous agent, and the next level would be a decentralized autonomous agent. So between the difference between these two is where we are leveraging the decentralized technology in order to use in order to let the autonomous agent become even go a step further, where they would have their own crypto wallet. They can start interacting in terms of sending the payments or receiving the payment. And that is where you would even be able to leverage the other key aspects of blockchain technology, leveraging the interaction with the smart contract and so on. That's where you move from a centralized autonomous agent to a decentralized autonomous agent, where all those interactions are happening in a decentralized environment, and you are able to leverage the payment rails. You are able to use the smart wallets and technology like that. So that's where, if I draw a pyramid, I feel that that's the tip of the iceberg, where we are able to take the agent to a next level of decentralization, and then the autonomous power of the agents would be even going to the next level, and they can control all their interactions, they can control all their decisions. And it would be always difficult for an agent to have a bank account. But then with the decentralized autonomous agent, they would be even having a crypto wallet, and that can open up a lot of payment related use cases. That's where I was going.
Yeah, so how would you kind of ensure trust in environment like where
Yeah.
getting more and more autonomous?
Sure. So I think the framework would remain same, right? It doesn't matter whether we are talking about the autonomous agent in the centralized world or in the decentralized world, right? I think the framework from our perspective is pretty much where how can we establish a unique identifier for an agent? Once we have established a unique identifier for the agent, you continue to build all level of trust with the agent, right? So starting with the first point where this unique identifier represents just one agent, that itself is very powerful. That brings the singularity aspect. The second layer is, can we associate who is the developer behind this particular agent? If we continue to build it further, who is the organization behind this agent, whether this agent has been attested by the legal authority for being fair, and so on. And then what are the user feedbacks that are going on chain in terms of attestation for those agents? So it doesn't matter whether we are talking about a centralized agent or a decentralized agent. I think this continue to build a reputation for the agent. And then if those attestations are verifiable easily, that's where we go towards a concept of trust registry. And then with the help of a trust registry, we can have a global view about this particular agent, and anybody in a decentralized format with the immutable registry can verify the reputations or the attestations for this agent.
And that would apply to agent interactions also, like
Yeah, both sides. I think agent to agent would certainly benefit much more, because typically human to agents are, I would say, more closed room, where let's say Expedia or Airbnb or Amazon deploying their agents, and then humans are interacting with those agents in the closed ecosystem. But then I think if we go towards more marketplace environment, I think this is where both human to agent and agent to agent can be more meaningful.
Yeah. Thank you.
So my last question, Ravi. So if that is case, there will be a dashboard where there will be a list of agents with their specialty and reputation, something like that, and whether they are up and running, something like that.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's where I was drawing an analogy. So today,
Okay.
before we start, let's say downloading a scanning application on Android Play Store, we certainly look out for those parameters. I'm sure that once we start seeing those kind of dashboard or marketplaces, they would have some kind of a framework where they can establish reputation for the agent, and it has to be also associated to, I would say, some kind of a business model. So imagine that you and me will feel more confident to pay that subscription fee to an application that belongs to, let's say, Microsoft or Google or Adobe, versus somebody that we may not be able to recognize. And that's where the reputation of an agent matters, and we are happy to pay a premium cost for that. And soon we believe that this kind of a framework, or I would say some kind of a UI that can represent the agent reputation, would be enabling a different pricing models, and developers would take active efforts in order to get those kind of certificates, get those kind of attestations, in order to start attracting more premium users and get premium subscriptions.
Got it. Any plans of building from pre-order, or like you are expecting from outside where to check all the agents which are
No, I
live?
think
Okay.
no, we do not have a plan in terms of creating this kind of UIs, but
Okay.
I believe that these are mainly from the launchpad, from the marketplaces, that they would be bringing up this and helping their set of ecosystem agents to have this kind of data points. But then we are mainly on the infrastructure side.
Got it. So even if I just want to add some extra attributes, it is from the person who want to add an extra attribute needs to add to the agent. Is that correct, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, I mean, you can provide attestation to an agent. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And it's on Polygon, or it is a separate blockchain or a L2 or something?
Yeah, I mean, typically Privado infrastructure can work across any EVM chains. We have started
Okay.
with 5 chains, but yeah, I think for the attestation, you can technically start it on any chain. EVM is more preferable.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi, once again, and we look forward to having you again in a future masterclass again in some form.
100% pleasure is mine, and anytime open for anything you want to talk about Web3 AI, always available.
Thank you so much. We will say bye to everyone. Have a good one. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Take care.